Life and works of a bodhisattva. Self-discipline and adhisthana. The logical and psychological equipment must be followed up by practical discipline, without which the bodhisattva could not be more than an idealistic philosopher. As all the sacred doctrines leave no room for option and doubt as to the import of self-discipline, let the bodhisattva retire into a quiet and solitary place and reflect within himself by means of the intelligence which lies in his inmost mind, not to be led by anybody else. Then he will be able to free himself from views based upon discrimination and by degrees advance towards the state of Tathagata-hood. This not depending upon another is emphasized not only in Mahayana literature but in the Agamas or Nikayas. For Buddhism is emphatically the doctrine of enlightenment which is to be realized within oneself. So, it is urged for the bodhisattva who wishes to penetrate behind the screen of contrasts and dialectics that he should rid himself of all the hindrances that may arise from noisy confusion, from heaviness of mind, and from sleepiness, and also that he should assiduously engage in disciplining himself throughout the night, not at all mindful of the philosophies of other schools, including the Hinayanist. Can the bodhisattva, however, reach his goal by his own effort and without any outside assistance? Is there really no other power that will come to his help? Here we have one of the special features of Mahayana Buddhism distinguishing itself from the Hinayana. The Lankavatara calls it the adhisthana of all the Buddhas which issues from their pradhana. Without this adhisthana on the part of the Buddha, the bodhisattva with all his assiduity and penetrating insight may be incapable of realizing the highest truth in himself and may not finally be taken up among the community of the Buddhas of the past, present, and future. Adhishvana means basis, position, power, etc. Translated into Chinese, the power that is added to and sustaining. It is the power emanating from the will of the Buddha whose loving heart embraces the whole universe, and is added to that of a bodhisattva to sustain him, to encourage him, and finally to carry him over to a state of self-realization. Not only in the present sutra but in other Mahayana sutras we frequently come across the sentence, through the Anubhava or Prabhava, that is, power of the Buddha, a bodhisattva rose from his seat and asks thus of the Buddha, or preached thus. This is a form of authorization, but in the case of adhisthana, it is more than that, for her. The Buddha's power sustains the bodhisattva throughout his long laborious career of discipleship. Read the following. And again, O Mahamati, sustained in two ways by the power of the Buddhas, the bodhisattva falls down at their feet and asks them to settle controversial points for him. What are the two ways? The one is the power by which the bodhisattva is made to attain states of mental tranquilization. And the other is that by which the Buddha personally appears before the bodhisattva and anoints him with his own hands. It is thus due to the power of the Buddha that the bodhisattva at the first stage attains the samadhi known as the light of the Mahayana. And that having attained this samadhi the bodhisattva finds himself now, blessed by the personal presence of all the Buddhas from the 10 quarters who will with their own body and speech accumulate their power upon him. It is like the case of the bodhisattva Vajraghava and others who are furnished with all these meritorious attributes. O Mahamati, in this wise the bodhisattva at the first stage is sustained by the power of the Buddhas in his attainment of the states of tranquilization. In virtue of a stock of merit accumulated for hundreds of thousands of kalpas, he will in succession ascend the stages, and qualifying himself with the virtues of perfect control, reach the stage of bodhisattvahood called Dharma Megha. Seating himself on a throne in the palace of the Great Lotus, he is surrounded by bodhisattvas like himself and wears a tiara adorned and embellished with all kinds of jewels. The Buddhas will now come from all the 10 quarters of the universe, shining like the brilliant full moon with yellowish, golden, champaka-like rays, and with their lotus-like hands anoint the forehead of the bodhisattva seated on the throne in the Lotus Palace. He is like the crown prince of a great sovereign, who, being thus anointed by the Buddhas personally with their own hands, assumes full power. This bodhisattva and such others are said to be sustained, thus hand anointed by the power of the Buddhas. These are the two ways in which the bodhisattva is sustained by the power of the Buddha. And when he is thus sustained, he will see all the Buddhas face to face. In no other way are the Tathagatas, Arhats, the fully enlightened ones, to be seen. And again, O Mahamati, whatever the bodhisattva accomplishes in the way of samadhi, psychic attainments, or preaching, is thus done by being sustained in two ways by the power of the Buddhas. If the bodhisattva could at all preach intelligently without being sustained by the power of the Buddhas, the ignorant would also preach intelligently. Why? It all depends upon whether or not one is sustained by the Buddha's power. If it is sustained by the entrance of the Tathagata into it, the whole universe with its grasses, shrubs, trees, and even mountains, and also with its musical instruments of all kinds, utensils, towns, dwellings, palaces, and seats, all will make music. How much more conscious beings, the deaf, blind, and mute, will be emancipated from their defects. Such is the power of the Tathagata, so distinctive, and so full of great virtues. Mahamati asked, why do the Tathagatas sustain the bodhisattva by their power when he abides in the state of tranquilization as well as when he is at the superior stage? Said the Blessed One, it is to keep him away from the evil one and from evil passions. It is to let him not fall into the jhana and stage of the Sravakas, but to make him attain to the self-realization of the Tathagata stage and grow in the virtues already acquired by him. For this reason, the bodhisattva is sustained by the power of all the Tathagata, O Mahamati. If he is not thus sustained, he may fall into the way of thinking as cherished by bad philosophers, Sravakas, and the evil one, and will not be enlightened in the supreme enlightenment. For this reason, the bodhisattva is favored by the Tathagatas who are arhats and fully enlightened ones. The purification of the heart. The conception of pranidhana, which is usually translated in Chinese as or simply meaning vow or prayer, is peculiar to the Mahayana. A bodhisattva as a rule makes a number of vows before he begins his career. For his desire to attain the final stage of bodhisattvahood is not only for his own benefit but for all the worlds visible and invisible. The 48 vows of Dharmakara are one of such examples, who became Amitabha Buddha, the world's savior, when his vows were all fulfilled. The bodhisattva's universal vow or prayer or earnest desire is, therefore, that all his fellow beings, inclusive of non-sentient beings, sooner or later, attain to the supreme enlightenment of the Buddha. To accomplish this end, he begins with the preparation of the ground, which consists in maturing the minds and hearts of all sentient beings, supported by the adhisthana of all the Buddhas. He who is literally the embodiment of the vow to benefit others is thus ever bent on awakening them in enlightenment. Hence in the Prajna Paramita and other sutras, the awakening of the thought of enlightenment is constantly spoken of as the first step towards gaining access to the truth of Tathagatahood. But the Lankavatara does not tell us so much about this awakening. In fact, I think there is no reference to this idea in the sutra. When the Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi is mentioned, it refers to its attainment and not to the awakening of thought towards it. Whatever this may be, there is a paragraph in the Lankavatara which is concerned with the purification by the Buddha of the hearts or minds of sentient begins from the effects of defilement that has been going on in them since the beginningless past due to their wrong discrimination regarding the signification of the objective world. This process of purification to be carried on by the Buddha may be considered to correspond to the awakening of the thought of enlightenment in the Prajna Paramita Sutras. Mahamati now raises a question as to the time needed for the purification by saying, Is the cleansing which is effected by the Buddha instantaneous or by degrees the cleansing of all beings from the outflowings of the mind whereby they cling to the reality of an objective world? To this the Buddha gives an answer as is quoted below, according to which his cleansing or purification takes effect sometimes instantaneously, sometimes by degrees. This variation evidently comes from the workings of the individual habit energy. The Buddha's statement here, however, seems to lack the word sometimes, and I think we have to supply it in order to make the sense of the whole context not too glaringly contradictory. Indeed, the reading of the Lankavatara is not altogether an easy task, as was already remarked elsewhere, and in many cases varied interpretations are possible. Mahamati asked, when the mind is cleansed by the Buddha of its own outflowings, it is done all at once or by degrees? Answered the Buddha, the cleansing is done by degrees, not all at once. It is like the ripening of the amra fruit, which takes place gradually and not at once. It is again like the potter's making pots, the work is done gradually and not at once. The Tathagata's cleansing of all beings of their minds from which external manifestations flow, is carried out by degrees and not all at once. It is again like the shooting of grass, shrub, herb, or a thicket on earth. It is gradual and not at once. So does the Tathagata cleanse all beings of their mental outflows. It is again like one's learning the arts of dancing, singing, writing, playing the lute, etc. It is mastered by degrees and not all at once. So does the Tathagata his purifying work. But sometimes the cleansing is done at once and not by degrees, as in the case of the mirror, reflecting all forms simultaneously and without discrimination. In a similar way, the Tathagata cleanses the minds of all beings from their outflowing manifestations, making them at once pure and free from discrimination and leading them to a state of no images. Again, as the sun or the moon illumines all forms and appearances at once with its beams of light, so does the Tathagata reveal at once the spiritual state of Buddhahood, which is the object of intuitive knowledge, by freeing all beings of their self-imagined manifestations, errors, and habit energy. Again, as the Alaya Vijnana reveals simultaneously an external world of individual objects as manifestations of the individual mind, so that Nishayanda Buddha, at once maturing all beings, enables them to discipline themselves as religious devotees at their abodes in the celestial palace of Akanishtha. Again, as the Dharmata Buddha shines instantly with the light of the Nishayanda Buddha and the Nirmala Buddha, so does the inner realization of the ultimate truth shine forth all at once, superseding the wrong views based upon ideas of being and not being. Single quote. The will body. No definite statement of the triple body dogma is found in the Lankavatara, but all the component ideas seem to be present, as is recognizable here. Dharmata Buddha, Nishayanda Buddha, and Nirmana Buddha, which apparently correspond to the later trinity of Dharmakaya, Sambhogakaya, and Nirmanakaya. It would be interesting to discuss here the development of the dogma if the author were not going to restrict himself in this chapter to such topics in the Lankavatara as are more or less directly connected with the absolute idealism developed in the sutra and with the intuitive knowledge of the truth which is its principal theme, these being the foundation of Zen Buddhism. He wishes, however, to touch upon the idea of Nirmana Buddha as it is closely related to that of Pranidhana, the Bodhisattva's vow.